Good afternoon, everybody. Or is it still morning?
We're still in morning.
Can't keep up.
It's afternoon in London.
For all the meetings I've had this morning, it feels like it's the end of the day.
Great. Well, so we're gonna have a little fireside chat here and just talk a little bit about what's going on. Sorry, you're right. Seaside chat here, talking about the idea of Bermuda innovation. So this is something that I think the world is noticing. I mean, the world has seen you speaking and seen Minister Keynes talking about the technology and the fintech opportunities in the country. Tell us more about like this legislation that was passed this year and the idea of digital assets, blockchain technologies in Bermuda. Why? What's the goal?
I will tell everyone who's here listening is that Stan is rather modest. And the fact is that Stan should actually claim credit for what it is that we're doing here in Bermuda. Because I remember it was right after the election campaign, and it was one of the first meetings that I had actually held. The hub culture, what you did last summer down at Ariel Sands, and it was during the election campaign that a lot was going on, so I was unable to attend. And I remember one of my assistants at the time brought this piece of paper forward and said, and I was like, oh yes, I really wanted to get to that, but I couldn't get to election campaign. I remember I rearranged my schedule to attend, and of course GP1 drives down to Ariel Sands, and everyone's all excited and wondering what's going on. And I sat there and I had a conversation, and it was a wonderful event. It was a time to learn, and Stan has pushed us since then to talk about the various opportunities inside of digital assets. And so from the perspective of saying, I mean, when a lot of people ask why wasn't blockchain either in your platform, why did blockchain come up, where did this come from? And I can just tell them that the opportunity presented itself because of the diligence of Stan and the people whom we work with, pressing the government on this particular aspect, saying that this is an opportunity, that Bermuda has an excellent opportunity to go ahead and advance. So Stan, I just want everyone here who's gathered to know that you should take a lot of the credit for making sure the government has gone in that direction. But after that, and after those conversations, we started seriously examining the various options. As you know, in November of last year, we put together a task force to examine this, both from the legal and regulatory side, and also from the business side. And now we've passed two significant pieces of legislation which are tailored specifically towards the sector, and a third piece of legislation which is ancillary, which is trying to solve another one of the problems which this space has. So the first piece of legislation was the Ico Act, as we like to call it. And it was just a very simple act which allows us for the issuance of digital tokens from Bermuda-based companies or limited liability companies. That was passed, it was debated in Parliament passed the House Assembly on April 27th of last year and went into effect in May. And that set up of course, a very strict regime for the analysis, and we'll get to that a little bit later, because one of the things that we've always had in Bermuda is we've always been about quality and not quantity. And we have a very high standard of companies that we want to meet here. And Bermuda, we're not trying to cater to everyone. We just only want the best and the highest quality companies that can meet the standards which we have. So the first thing that we laid out was the ICO Act, which basically will allow the issuance of digital assets from Bermuda. The second thing was our Digital Asset Business Act, which was tabled, I want to say, in May 7th or 8th. It was tabled, and I announced it to the, I would say, the crypto community at Consensus in New York. And at that point in time, it was a piece of legislation which was laid down, which would be the first regime to fully license the full scale of digital asset businesses. From that perspective, we went ahead, we debated that legislation, we passed that legislation, and that is now being managed through the Bermuda Monetary Authority on that end. The third piece of legislation of which we passed, which is related to all this, is recognizing a particular problem. And that particular problem, especially from the Bermuda perspective, was the challenges that companies inside of this sphere would face when after being licensed in accessing banking services. And I think that's something that is very important. So from the perspective of recognizing the challenges with, I would say, the correspondent bank relationships that our domestic banks had, we said that there might be an opportunity here for us to allow more innovative types of banks that do not have to have the full retail infrastructure that our current Banking and Deposits Company Act has, but will allow them to provide services to companies inside of this sphere, and whether they be their employees, the related companies, et cetera, to make sure that those persons can have access to banking services where the risk appetite may not exist inside of our traditional banking sector. So those are the three items of which we've laid out. The Digital Asset Business Act came into effect in September. Applications have already come in for licensing through the BMA, who is going through that process. The Ico Act, as I said, went live about a few months ago. We've had companies that have applied for that. It is a very stringent process. As the first company that was licensed, I think I issued and signed off on the license earlier this week. They found out that it is not an easy process, but it's not supposed to be an easy process. It is supposed to be a process where we put you through the paces to make sure that what it is that you're doing can actually match with the Bermuda standard, can make sure that what it is not going to have a negative repercussion to our jurisdiction from a reputational standpoint, and that you can feel comfortable that you went through all of this particular level of analysis, and your investors can feel comfortable that you passed basically the highest scrutiny of standards in going forward. So I think that we're very proud of what we've set up. And from the Bermuda perspective, we want those high quality companies to come here and recognize Bermuda as that place for a global home.
Okay, well, this is amazing because, in just 1 year, you've managed to build a platform, right? And the platform, or so you could call it like, the country as a platform, right? To be able to bring these companies here. So you set the rules, you got the interest. Now, what can the industry do to collaborate to kind of push us to the next level? What are you guys looking for here from an industry collaboration side?
Well, I think from an industry collaboration perspective, a lot of the stuff that's already gone on has been helpful. So we look at events like what the events that you've organized this week, which speak about how industry can help with directing the next evolution. And I think that's what we're talking about. I mean, there is going to be a lot of advancements and innovation that's going to come from the digital asset space. It's based the next level. So I mean, we had the ICOs, and but then the next level is security token offerings. The next question is, how do you then tokenize various assets around the world? How do you put those into a structure? How do you regulate those? So from the Bermuda perspective, we do not believe that we have stopped putting in place legislation to support this industry. We believe that we are just getting started, and we want to understand from industry what are the types of things in which you feel can be a part of the legislative framework in Bermuda, which will enable us to continue to advance, enable us to continue to innovate, and make sure that Bermuda can serve as that platform for innovation. So some of that stuff has come forward already. Some of the things when we're talking about making sure that we can do things to make, I want to make Bermuda a home for security tokens based on real estate, and I want that to be something, so I know that's something we've discussed, as the government's already pushing forward with its EID initiative, and we want that to be an open platform so that there can be various things that can tie in to that to enable the services inside of the digital economy. So what we want is that feedback on what is it that can work, what is it that Bermuda needs to do more, and what are the areas of which they feel. Because if you see the speed of which we're able to put this legislation into place, that is the same speed that we're able to put other pieces of legislation into place that can enable that innovation and enable more business to be directed to our shores.
And there is a lens to this, right, which is jobs and education, because fundamentally it's great to bring companies in and provide the frameworks to grow, but you guys Bermuda has a goal here, right, which is jobs and education. Can we talk about that for a second?
Absolutely. I think that it doesn't make any sense to create economic activity if the people who live in your country cannot be a part of it. And so from that perspective, we've been very deliberate in recognizing that, of course, we have to create these opportunities, but at the same point in time as creating these opportunities, we need to ensure that the Bermudians can play a part in that. And so wherever that's a part from the compliance side, whether that's a part from the technology development side, or whether that's a part in actually developing their own applications, developing their own intellectual property, innovating and being a part of that as well. And we feel that with the FinTech Business Unit, which has a dedicated education officer, which is looking to make sure that we can have programs not only at the Bermuda College, but also retraining programs and other programs for people who may want to get involved. I think that that's the avenue which we are pressing, and I think that it will bear fruit. One of the challenges that we have is that there's local noise insofar as, I would say, where are the jobs? That's the question. And I think what is important to realize is that from this industry in its infancy, the jobs are not going to be immediate. But if we get it right, if we make sure that we take the time not to try to go with the quick fix, but to make sure that we have the correct environment, that we have the highest level of standards here, we can build something in the long term that can stand the test of time, just like the Bermuda market has come to be for insurance. And I think that's the best example. I can refer people, we had an executive forum hosted by the Business Development Agency in May. And at that point in time, Brian O'Hara was saying that the same comments that he's hearing in Bermuda about the digital asset industry is the same things that they were saying about Bermuda form insurance and reinsurance back in 1986. And the fact is, we know what happened with that, but we took our time and we got it right. And the government's going to take our time and get it right in this particular instance.
Yeah, I think, with the way that technology is changing, and, you work in technology as well, but the reality is that jobs versus work is a subject that needs to be talked about because, quite frankly, all around the world, types of jobs are going to go away, but there's a lot of work to do. So enabling the population and the infrastructure for people to be able to do work will give them jobs. But then you have exciting, demanding, intellectually stimulating work. And that brings us to, what's your vision? 5 years out, we look at what we've done in a year. It's exciting. You and I have spoken about this idea of Bermuda Standard. I've communicated my vision for Bermuda, which is that I think it could become the world's first cloud state with servicing millions of customers and people around the world to provide a new range of as yet unimagined services. What about you? What's your view for the country? What's your vision for, say, 2023?
You're asking me to tell the future, and that is a very difficult thing to
get out some tarot cards.
However, and it'll be difficult for me to say definitively, but what I can say is that I want to make sure that Bermuda is a center for innovation. So ideally, in 5 years' time, we'll have a number of companies in this space who would have made innovations, who would have created intellectual property, who would have made and solved problems for the world, who would start exporting their goods and services from the Bermuda base and have headquarters here. We want to make sure that we can continue to build out our international business footprint. We have a nice footprint when it comes to insurance and reinsurance. We know that we have certain items when it comes to asset management and trust and private client, but this can be another part of that international business footprint in Bermuda, and that's what it is that we want to do. And so from that perspective, if we look in 5 years where we want to be ideally, it's where we are right now when it comes to insurance, being recognized as a leading space, being recognized as a place where there is an incredible amount of intellectual capital in this space, and a place where innovations are coming, where innovations are happening. And that's how we want Bermuda to be recognized in this space. No one would possibly imagine that Bermuda would have one of the highest concentration of insurance companies. That would not be something that people would have thought of would have been 40 years ago, but we have it now. And the question
80% of the reinsurance market?
Absolutely. And the thing is, what can we do going forward? So I think that we've seen how this can work if we do it right. That is the model of which we're trying to follow and emulate, and I think that we've made an excellent start. And what I would say is that industry has been particularly helpful. The Business Development Agency, the team that is working there, are always there and ready to take in ideas. Minister Keynes and his team, who are responsible for ICT innovation and policy, are there to get ideas. Those ideas come to us, and we make sure that if it makes sense, that we can turn it around and put it into legislation. But our legislation itself is very broad. Our legislation has lots of various options that are there. And I think that right now, where we stand, there are companies that can basically do things in Bermuda in a well-regulated environment that they would not be able to do in other places.
Yeah, I think anywhere in the world, really. Right? I mean, I think it is the most comprehensive approach.
I haven't been keeping up with the legislation in various countries where we were as opposed to in May, but I mean, I like what it is that we built here. There are challenges that exist, and I don't want to sugarcoat that. We have still not solved the banking problem, but I want Bermuda to solve the banking problem, and we're taking steps to solve that banking problem. But that is still a significant problem that exists. But from the Bermuda perspective, we know that we're on the right track, and we welcome events such as this and others to inform us of what more you would like to see from a jurisdiction like ours, and we are ready and willing to work with industry to ensure that we can continue to advance the development of this industry locally.
Yeah, very good. very good. You know, at Ben World on Monday, we had some discussions broadly about these buckets. So everybody knows about e-identity, and I feel like the world is already looking at Bermuda in that front. Cybersecurity, we think there's a big opportunity. Insurance, obviously a big opportunity. We think that there's greenfield in payments for Bermuda that could be revolutionary because of online payments being global. And then education. Those five buckets, like, do you see them all being interconnected? And, you know, as we kind of wrap up here in a second, um, you know, again, back to that 5-year vision, do you see all those as being relevant? Is there anything else that you're looking for that can come to the island that would be relevant for what you guys want to bring?
From the perspective of where we stand, and this is the position that I always want Bermuda to be in, I don't want the government to lead on that matter. I want industry to say, these are the type of things in which we think can work. These are the type of things which we're looking for, and how can we work with the government of Bermuda to make those reality. I am not going to any way, shape, or form profess that the government has the brightest minds in this space. We don't. But we have the willingness to listen to the brightest minds in this space, to work with the brightest minds in this space, to say these are the type of advancements and developments we can do. So when you're talking about those five buckets, it would be amazing if Bermuda could be a payment center. Absolutely. And I think that with some of the companies which we're seeing coming to Bermuda and examining Bermuda, that could be a possibility. Our responsibility is to make sure that it's done inside of a well-regulated environment and support those companies in whichever way we can from the government side to make that a reality. So from the Bermuda perspective, when you are a rock in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean with your nearest landmass being 700 miles away, you have to learn how to innovate in order to survive. Bermuda has had that history of innovating in order to survive, and this is just a natural extension to that history of innovation. We want innovators to feel at home in Bermuda. We welcome them, as I remember saying for that young gentleman who was from Hungary when I was on the beach last July. I said, if you want to come to Bermuda and sit down and write code on my beaches for the rest of your life, you're more than welcome to do so, because your intellectual property will be here and you can export that property to the rest of the world and create jobs and opportunity from my shores. That's the message which I had for there, and that's the message which I have for all. We want Bermuda to be that home of innovation, and we welcome innovators to come here and to innovate.
Coders can come, right? Great. Thank you so much for joining us today. I know that you have an extremely busy schedule. We're so grateful and honored that you joined us. I want to personally thank you and really the people of Bermuda for hosting us and making Hub Culture and Ben feel welcome here for 11 or 12 years now. And I think that, you know, we can really put a flag in the ground and say, hey, the world's first digital asset, the longest running digital asset in the form of Ben came from Bermuda. So, you know, it may have been not very well known and it may not be as big as a lot of other things out there, but when it came to like the guidance and the culturing, nurturing capability of this country for a small country or for a small company to start, you know, Bermuda really has delivered. So there are many more seeds to plant, right? And thank you so much for joining us. I hope you can stay for a few more minutes as we get into our next panel, but we also, if you have to go, you got to go.
Absolutely. Well, the only thing I can say, it was an absolute pleasure to be here. As you heard me extol Stan's virtues, it is a clear and simple fact that Bermuda would not have been on the road that it is without Stan. So I want to thank you as well. Thank you, Stan.
Thanks very much. Great. Thanks so much.